Hello and welcome back to this week's episode of the TF Cast. My name is Willis Stout.
Hey, we got Zach here in the solarium on July 6th, 2022.
And I'm your host, Jacob Bases. Today with us, we have Jim Parejko of LocAle Brewing right here in Mankato, Minnesota. Jim, please introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a little bit about the brewery.
So we've been open for about 3.5 years. We're just a small neighborhood brewery. I mean, on the scale of a lot of the big breweries, we're, in the bottom, small group. And we pretty much just produce for our tap room sales. So we don't have a lot of accounts. We've got a couple of restaurants around town that carry our stuff, but I'm the brewer there. My wife and I own it, so we don't have anybody telling us what to do other than the customers. We're just we do what we want to do. We brew with the beer we want to brew. And it's been a journey. So it's been a lot of fun though.
Just like right off the bat, how did you get into brewing, and like what was that decision to like move from whatever the idea is of I want to own a brewery to I'm gonna own a brewery?
Yeah. So it took many years. I started brewing. I know this is a story like everybody tells of home brewing. I started as a home brewer. Before I was 21, I was going to undergrad at UW La Crosse, and I was in the microbiology program there. They taught us how to brew beer in lab. So I was like, I got to try it at home. Can't buy the actual beer in the store because I'm not 21, so I can brew it, right? So I got all my dad's equipment from when he was brewing back in like the 70s, and bought the ingredients off eBay, I think it was. Brewed my first batch in the basement of our rental house. I was living with a bunch of track and cross country guys, and it worked. So I didn't die at the time. So it was great. And so I just kind of went from there, and it became sort of a hobby, a creative outlet, and eventually, through grad school, we were out west. Eventually, kind of started coming up with the idea of maybe moving back to the Midwest and starting a brewery, because at that time the Surly bill was kind of actually got passed, and I think it was 2011. So that allowed breweries to have tap rooms and sell growlers, which opened up the door for a lot of breweries in Minnesota. And so it was still an idea for us at that time, but we were just kind of playing around with it. And I entered a lot of home brewing competitions, got a lot of feedback, eventually worked at a couple of breweries, including Shell's. Just kind of got to know people and learn more, did a lot of research. And eventually, we found a spot and just kind of went from there. So
Cool. Is this the first business you've owned and been a part of like this too?
Yeah, this is our first business.
Awesome.
It's been a learning process.
Yeah, I bet.
Like businesses, to start, if you haven't been involved in any for one, coming up with concept, but then also all the paperwork and everything, that was a big thing for me. Is just like, this is like ridiculous how many hoops we have to jump through, but also just getting things off the ground.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the brewery itself for us was very organic. Like, I'm from Wisconsin originally. My wife is from near Mankato, but we didn't have a lot of connections to Mankato, other than her family. And so it was trying to get the word out about a new business without having those connections to the area. And so that was a big learning process for us too. It's like marketing without like actual marketing, But the business was, we took it in stride, and we kind of we knew we had to be open at a certain time in order to start paying bills and all these things. And so there are some things you can't speed up as far as like permits go, but some things, we did ourselves just to kind of get the timeline going. So,
You mentioned, your connection to the area being your wife's family, but about, here specifically, what, it could have been the cities or just anywhere else. Is there anything about Mankato or the reception you've had here that's made you feel any type of way?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So yeah, part of the reason we moved back to the Mankato was to be closer to my wife's family, but also we knew this area was sort of waiting for another, not just another brewery, but another place for people to go and hang out with family, and sort of be just a relaxing environment, right? Not a sports bar, not like that kind of environment, but something it's just a neighborhood joint, I guess you could say. And so, we moved here and started looking for that space, and landed on one that we had to remodel and everything. But it was also like we knew Mankato was a place that had a lot of opportunities that are starting to come about. Like there are a lot of new businesses that are opening. I went to school in La Crosse. I'm from Western Wisconsin, and a lot of those sort of same size cities in Wisconsin are starting to see that resurgence, like Eau Claire, La Crosse, where there are new breweries, new restaurants, new event centers, new entertainment centers coming up all the time. And I think Mankato's sort of on that rise. And so that played a big part of it too.
I really feel that. I feel like Mankato could have a few such places, and it's kind of odd that it doesn't. I
still got a little more, but yeah, I'll take it.
We should actually talk about this because
what's
it's
this
going to
one?
be empty, and I want to know things about it. So you make beer, and we're drinking some of that. Push it over here. There we go. We got this. What is this?
Pivo Lotto.
Pivo. I would have never guessed.
Yeah.
It's a Pivo Lotto. So what's going on here, and what makes it that thing?
Yeah. So Pilsners are a type of lager. So it's kind of just like breaking down the categories for you because everything's sort of organized in that sense. So Pilsners are, hoppier lagers. They usually have a little more bitterness that makes them refreshing. But if you think of like a classic Czech style Pilsner, that'd be like Pilsner Urquell. That's probably one of my favorite beers. And so what makes it a Pilsner, again, it's brewed with a certain type of lager yeast. It's brewed with a very simple grain or malt base, using Pilsner malt, which makes it light in color and also kind of have that graininess. And then the hops. So in this case, we used a Polish hop that's grown in Poland. And so this is what Polish Pilsners would use, is this particular type of hop. So if you think about like hops, sort of like apples, there are different varieties of apples, like Honeycrisp, et cetera. There are different varieties of hops, right? And it, depending on where they're grown, it changes also kind of the way they taste and the way they smell. And so that's kind of the basic idea of that style of beers. It's a very like basic beer to brew. It just takes a long time because you let it condition for a long time in a cold temperature.
Oh, sure. So, I've always had a question for any type of beverage that has a word that I don't associate with liquids. Like when they call wines dry, or like when you said this is a grainy drink, I certainly know exactly what you mean. But is there a word for that, like what you're describing? It's a thing, right?
Yeah. So I would say a lot of the brewing industry, a lot of the beer connoisseurs, they use a lot of the words that wine connoisseurs use. So like the wine industry for the longest time has put a lot of effort into describing flavors. And the beer industry has been behind on that, and it's starting to catch up now, but we use a lot of the same descriptors. So usually we'll say like, this is a dry beer. It has that dryness you can feel in the back of your mouth after you drink. We usually describe things as being like citrusy. It's a very like broad term, but yeah, I mean, it's just a lot of the same descriptors you would see in other beverage industries. Coffee is another big one that's coming up with a lot of new terms for things, but
certainly. Yeah, I feel like in the last just decade even, it's been kind of like an explosion in craft craft beer. I feel like I can't go anywhere without at least being offered a hazy now. And I mean, I think those are. I couldn't drink like a whole bunch of hazies, but it's cool to see a variety. You know, what started people on the whole citrus beer thing? 'Cause I think we're about to crack a citrus beer next here, right?
Yeah.
This Bachelor Farmer coming up.
Yeah. So with, like you said, hazy IPAs or hazy pale ales, the whole point is to get people into hop forward beers that wouldn't otherwise buy a hop forward beer. So like, I would say even like 5 or 6 years ago, maybe more, but IPAs have like for the longest time been thought of as being like really bitter and sometimes astringent. And that like precludes like a big population of people from drinking them, right? And so the whole point of hazy IPAs or New England style IPAs is to reduce that bitterness to almost nothing, but still have a lot of hop aroma and hop flavor. And that's partially what causes them to be hazy. It's just we use so many hops in them that have those citrus notes to them. And so the fun thing to me about those beers is that you can kind of layer the different hop characteristics. And then you can play around with the yeast that you use to change or add sort of complement flavors or to add new flavors. But yeah, like you said, like it's been really cool to see sort of the different takes different breweries have on that style of beer.
How is it? How do you imagine a beer like before it exists? When you're like thinking about creating one,
Yep.
what does your mind do to the level one kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know this sounds kind of like maybe that I've thought of saying it before, but sometimes I think of it like a canvas. So like the ingredients that I have, the hops, the malt, the yeast are like the different sort of paint styles. And then the colors would be the actual hop variety that I use. So what do I want to come from it? Like, do I want it to be a very simple beer, but something that's very refreshing, which would be like a Pilsner, that uses a very, very simple ingredients? Or do I want it to have a lot of color, like a lot of like flashiness to it in something like a hazy IPA? So that would be for like basic beers. But then when we get into like sours, mixed culture sours, at that point, like I usually let what we call the bugs, which are like the yeast and bacteria, do the talking first, and then I kind of blend them together in order to sort of create something more than the separate parts, right? So it's like when I'm coming up with a new beer, a lot of the times it's like, what do I want for the season, for the customers, but what do I also, like, what do I want to brew? Like, is there something that I really feel like maybe shows who we are as a brewery, or like my background as a brewer, or my background as a person, right? So it kind of, there are a lot of different sort of things that come about with it, but yeah, like I said, it's playing around with different ingredients and coming up with new flavors that maybe I haven't tried before.
Along that line, have you ever had what you thought was a good idea for a beer that just turned out awful?
Yeah, I mean, everybody does. It's like we're all human. It's so that brings up a good point in that usually what it is, as far as like if something turns out terrible, it's usually like you didn't pay close attention to like the principles. So like there are certain principles in brewing that you need to follow in order to reach what you want, right? So whether it be changing something called the mash temperature, which is like when you mix the grain with water, like what is that going to do? The temperature of the fermentation, like when the yeast are bubbling away, you have to control that. So usually that, like not paying attention to those principles is when you end up with something that's like not palatable. But yeah, I mean,
like a well executed beer that just turned out poor though.
Yeah, I mean it's happened. Or like if you make a mistake along the way in either kegging it or transferring it, and one of the principal reasons why you have beer go bad is that oxygen gets into the package, into the keg, into the tank, into the can. And so you want to get as much oxygen out as you can. Well, if some of it creeps in, the beer can go bad pretty quickly. So
A lot of variables that could cause it.
yep, exactly. So it's just kind of trying to reduce the risk along the way. So
I feel like the palate has greatly expanded as of. I mean, if you went like to like the Chicago World's Fair in the 1800s and served someone a flight of your sours, I don't know. Like, no, they might have combusted or
Yeah.
something. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what would have happened.
Yeah.
I think about that a lot. Like, because I mean, at one point, Pabst Blue Ribbon got the blue ribbon. And I want to know what second and third place were
Yeah.
too, like if those still exist. But I mean, that said, you kind of described what those hazy beers are trying to do. On the other side, what have like the sour beers that have really kind of exploded? What market are they going after, and how does that work? Also, can you pass me that?
Let's crack.
So in a lot of ways, it's a very similar market to hazy IPA, or hazy IPAs, what they're going for. Because sour beers over the last, again, I'd say 5 years, the amount of fruit that they use to produce sour beers has just like skyrocketed. So whether it's like tropical fruits or berries or pretty much it's going for what is going to be, somewhat sweet, but also sour and very fruit forward. So thanks.
Thank you.
So like, it's a lot of the people that maybe don't want a standard beer, but want something that has a lot of fruit in it. I mean, that's where sour beers have gone. So it's creating something less sour, something more palatable for a lot of people. I mean, I don't mind. I really like sours. Like they're my thing, but they're not everybody's thing. So
Sure.
I'm a big sour fan too.
good. Yeah.
I took my father to Star Keller in New Ulm, and we got a flight of every single one of them, and somehow he individually expressed how each one was completely undrinkable.
Yeah.
And like they were fine. Like there's nothing wrong with that brewery, but I was also really surprised that really is all that they served there. Like
Sours?
they didn't have it is
Really?
a sour brewery in a town the size of New Ulm.
That's wild.
And that was a few months ago. And when I was sitting in LocAle, I was like, if New Ulm can support a whole sour brewery, we could have like 6 of these here,
Yeah.
like for sure. Also, earlier you mentioned something about how people would interpret like who you are as a brewery. What is that ethos? Like, what are you trying to bring to the table as a brewery, and what do you want people to gather from drinking your beers?
Yeah. So I'm actually going to come back to the Star Killer thing in a second. But originally we opened and we were really excited, and I still am really excited about using as many sort of Midwest grown ingredients as possible. That's kind of the LocAle, being a sense of place, providing, showing the ingredients that we can grow in our, 100-mile radius or whatever. And I'm still excited about that, and that's kind of partially what I try to do with some of our mixed culture sour beers in the bottles, is to showcase whether it's like locally grown hops or grain or these other things. And that's still a big part of who we are. For instance, like in Bachelor Farmers, so this hazy pale ale, we use Minnesota grown Cascade hops, which are grown just like over in Chatfield, Minnesota. And then I use a lot of locally grown wheat, which is grown over in Sleepy Eye for it too. So it's like we incorporate a lot of the local ingredients, but also I pull in some things that like some of the other hops that we use are from the West Coast to maybe elevate some of those local ingredients. So that's a big part of what we do. And kind of what I do as a brewer is try to find those ingredients, those local ingredients, but also, I also want to bring in things from whether it's globally sourced ingredients like the Polish hops. I mean, just, it's partially because like I'm Polish and I wanted to brew sort of a classic European Pilsner. But we also used, malt from up in Shakopee for that. So it's like creating something a little bit different than what you could just go in the liquor store and buy, but using a lot of sort of local ingredients for it, as many as we can at least. And also just having that quality of a beer that we try to be, as high quality as we can in everything we do. And I think, from a sustainability standpoint, buying as many local ingredients is important for me. Like, it doesn't have to be shipped as far. We know the growers. Like, we can actually just drive up to buy some malt, rather than having it shipped across the ocean or whatever. Mm-hmm. So that's a big part for me. But again, just kind of showcasing the terroir of the local ingredients as much as we can.
How large are these farms? Like, I drive all over southern Minnesota, and you see corn and soybeans and all these things. I couldn't tell you what these crops look like.
Yeah, so they're not like 1,000-acre farms. At least the hop yards. I think the one that is over in Chatfield is maybe 5 acres, so it's small. But hops are unique in that they grow like vertically, like 20 feet. So it's more of like a three-dimensional like growth, so that you're utilizing more of the space above the crop. So they grow almost as vines. They're called bines because they don't have a bark like grapevines do. So they're really unique plants. We used to grow some out near my wife's family near Medelia, and so that's kind of how I know a lot more about hops than I think the average person does, at least growing them. But yeah, they grow them, they can process them, and then they have them pelletized by somebody. So getting the hops down into a usable form for breweries.
What do you mean a usable form?
Yeah, so hops themselves are like they look like a little flower, like if you were to just pick it off the vine, and really they are the flower of the plant. But then they take those and sort of grind them up and pack them into a little pellet, so that the pellet looks like just a little tiny, almost like rabbit food, and allows us as a brewery to be able to use them because if we generally we can't use the whole cone, which is the whole flower. It just, with the equipment that we have, it's not possible to really separate them out. So if we use the pellets, we can add them directly to our boil, add them directly to our tanks, and then basically allow gravity to pull them down, and we can separate them off that way. So it's just about the process, really. So
a while back, I think maybe even last Super Bowl, I saw this ad campaign from Budweiser where they were like, "We're a macro brewery, not a micro brewery." Is there like a reason, like as things get smaller, like whiskey, that they kind of like do craft stuff in small batches? Is there some kind of difference in what comes out based on the volume of what goes in?
So are you basically saying like macro brewery is brewing craft beer, sort of like that idea, or?
No, I just mean like, does having, like, as the scale goes up, could you use whole flowers, or does it change the entire process to work, in the scale that you're working at now?
Yeah, it definitely does. So, if you worked at like a 5-gallon scale of being at your home, you can basically use whatever you want, right? Everything is very manageable. At our scale, at like 220 gallons, things get a little more like you're moving around hot liquids that are like scalding. So you have to like consider all of the factors of moving liquids from place to place. How do you get it through something called the heat exchanger, which like cools it down after boiling, and what's going to cause issues with like your pumps and those kind of things. So then if you scale it up even more, those become even bigger issues because you have now, let's say 10,000 gallons that you need to move from place to place, and you don't want to like cause it to get stuck somewhere, So yeah, there are a lot of scaling issues around brewing. So
What's the dream for LocAle? Do you hope to grow, or do you like the microbrewery? What did you call it earlier? You said the Surly law made it such that you could have a tap room.
Yep. Tap room and sell
and
growlers and that kind of thing.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, so we don't have like aspirations of becoming a production brewery and just like making as many cans as we can and selling those cans to the liquor store.
Yeah.
We want to stay tap room centric, but we also we understand that people want to buy stuff from the liquor store. So we have to like put on our customer hat every so often and understand that people can't always make it to the tap room when we're open. So with that said, like we're looking at getting like a small canning line so that we could sell to MGM or to the Civic Center, so that our market reach gets out a little bit more. But also, we maybe can reach more customers. And so yeah, like I said, we're really just focused on making the tap room as interesting and as inviting and as exciting as possible, like putting on new beers whenever we can. So
For anyone for our listeners or viewers who haven't seen the tap room or been in your location, could you just kind of like describe what it's like, what's going on there?
Yeah, so one of the things, so like I said, we went to graduate school out west in the Pacific Northwest in Washington, and they're known as being like the mecca for craft beer. Like they kind of started it all in a lot of ways. California too. And so we spent a lot of time like going to different tap rooms and kind of seeing what we liked and what we didn't like about different places. And one of the things that really stood out to us is places that had a lot of light and were maybe a little more modern looking without being minimalist. And just not like the standard sort of, there's a joke in the brewing industry of like the tap room, what's it called? Like box that you could basically pull items from and build a tap room out of. So like
the kit,
the pallet wood and the uncomfortable
Irish
stools.
pub kit.
Yeah. So we didn't want to go down that road. We kind of wanted something that was bright and airy, that had a lot of color. And so that's kind of what we went with. And it was a unique situation. It was like an old auto lube building. But we also like believe a lot in repurposing things. So, rather than just tearing down a building and rebuilding something, reusing what's there if we can. And it worked out really well because it's kind of like an empty shell. Like the building itself is like a brick house. You can pull out everything inside, and that's what we did. And then we just kind of built up what we needed. And so we're adding things all the time, but it's kind of what we've envisioned all along. So
It is very tight. I would say that if I could easily endorse it, it's definitely the best secondary location for an Arbys meal.
Oh, yeah.
Like if you just want to up the ambiance, you can go in there and get a beer. And I like that you can bring food in there.
Are you being paid by Arbys?
I'm not. I think that they might not appreciate that. I'm like, well, the ambiance sucks and there's no beer.
They know about their ambiance.
But yeah, I mean that's kind of like what we. In some ways, we try to push is that we're like a second location for poly ice, for instance. Like people, whether if it's full at that restaurant or maybe they want different beer, at Poly Ice, they can come down to our place, order pizza from Poly Ice, and they'll deliver it. And it works out really well that way. For us to be kind of for some restaurants, we're kind of like the liquor license holder because we can sell beer. Some like food trucks can't, right? And so they show up. But we're the location for them. It works out both ways, right? So, but yeah, that's been a lot of fun to, bring in food from other restaurants, but also we try to get food trucks from the area as much as possible. So.
If somebody wanted to pull through and get some flights when the food trucks were there, what would they have to do? Where would they have to watch someplace for an announcement, or is there a regular schedule?
Yeah, we don't have a regular schedule. I mean, it's around the area. We have some really good food trucks, but there aren't that many. And so it's been hard. Like I was saying earlier, like we don't necessarily procrastinate on these things, but we just kind of don't get to it until like 2 weeks beforehand. And that can be really hard with food trucks and even musicians too. So yeah, like for whatever reason this summer, food trucks are like booked out months ahead of time. So it's been hard. We have a couple coming up. On the 16th, we have one. And then in August, we have one. But it's not like a regular thing, unfortunately. But it's kind of what we deal with.
I wonder if food trucks are a hot business model right now. They probably are.
Yeah, I think they are. We've played around with the idea of getting one ourselves.
Yeah.
And just parking it there. Because actually, I was out in Seattle in March of this year to visit my brother. And one of the breweries we went to, actually a lot of them have their own, it's not necessarily their own food truck, but they've come up with an agreement with a food truck that it's going to be parked there for like 6 months straight, you know. And that's worked out really well for them because then they don't have to have a kitchen in the tap room or in the brewery. And the food truck kind of takes over that role. So
That's cool.
So yeah, we're playing around with that idea, but it's a big investment. So
I suppose you got to try and build a whole kitchen into a truck. That doesn't sound as simple as maybe I was thinking right away.
Yeah, but actually, I was going to mention. So I worked at Starkeller for a year and a half as sort of the tap room. Whoops.
Zach's popping bottles back
Is that a feature of that one?
Yeah, that one actually sometimes. Yeah.
Tell us what happened.
Oh, this is the sour. I gotta try some.
Yeah, both of them are sours actually. But we had a catering kitchen at Starkeller, where it was like a basic kitchen with dishwasher, refrigerator, that kind of thing, and then we'd bring in. So it allows you to do more things rather than just pretzels, and so that was kind of an interesting view into like a different way to design a tap room, from the food standpoint. So.
Is there typically what are the is it exploding?
Going.
Show it to the camera. Show it to
That'll
the camera. This is going.
It's very exciting.
So this one has that beer has a certain
nuts.
yeast called Brettanomyces, and it eats basically anything. So that's why it's foaming over. So creates a lot of carbonation.
Makes noise.
Where you can pour off some in there. But yeah, actually, when I worked at Starkeller, that was, like you were saying, the challenge was to try to get people to drink these beers that were very unconventional. And not all the time, but a lot of the time, people that left, at least they had an appreciation for the beer, for that type of beer, when they left. So that was kind of fun to see. But big part of it is just educating people on how they're made.
So you mentioned that like the hazy and what's a sour most like? Because the hazy IPA is kind of introducing people to the bitterer beers. What's the sour take on that?
Yeah, so like this style of beer, this is sort of a mixed culture sour. This is the type of beer that's not popular with everybody because it has a lot of really unique flavor and aroma. But generally what I find is that people that like wines usually like this type of beer because it has some of the same characteristics, some of the same aromas, some of the same flavors. And that acidity is also present in wine too. So that's something that you kind of discover over time. But yeah, I mean, again, this type of sour is different from like the heavily fruited sours that are, I would say, definitely more popular.
Okay.
But there's a lot of people that still like these sort of more funky, is kind of how it's described, funky beers. So
I mean, you said wine, right? As I took my first sip of this, and I did get like a oaky Chardonnay kind of feel right off of it then. So it might have been an Inception thing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, no, that's how we, like, when I, again, just going back to my experience at Starkeller, when we tried to get people to think about the beer that they're going to drink in their flight of kind of crazy sours, one of the things that we would ask them is like, do you like white wine or do you like red wine? Because we could sort of guide them in that way. The darker mixed culture sour is a lot more like red wine. You know, they have a lot of that depth to them. So,
what is do you have recurring products, or is this just like a new beer over and over and over again kind of thing?
yeah. So actually, Bachelor Farmer, the hazy pale ale, was one of the first beers that we brewed at LocAle.
Cool.
So we brought that back consistently.
I like that one a lot. That's
Yeah.
strong.
I'd say that's one of our more popular beers.
I like
Yeah,
that it tastes like a summer beer, but it doesn't taste like a shandy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has those orange citrus notes to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are a lot of, whether it's a seasonal beer, we have a lot of seasonal beers that we just kind of rotate through. So they're returning, but they only return a certain time of year. But I would say like maybe, I don't know, a quarter of the beers we put out are new ones that either will return again, or maybe I'll wait a little while to return again. So like Pivo is a new one that we put out this summer, the Pilsner. Again, that was partially just because I was excited to brew a Pilsner. But so, yeah, I would say 3/4 of them return at some point.
Sure. And is that a like a local crop availability thing, or is it just like beer having seasons that I wasn't aware of?
Yeah, a big part of it is people's tastes change with the seasons. So, like we have also one of our original beers on tap right now, Deep Valley, which is an oatmeal stout. Not a lot of people drink dark beers in the summer, but we do have a core group of people that come into the tap room and want the darkest beer you have on tap. And it's like 95 degrees outside. So, so it's one of those things, like most people, you know, in the wintertime want something dark and malty. In the summertime want something light and crisp and maybe hoppy. So yeah, that's kind of the seasonality of it. But also, yeah, I would say there are some. Well, I can get the hop varieties I need year round because they can be frozen. But I can get other things year round, like grain. So it's not so much a seasonality of the ingredients, other than maybe fruit would be one example, but that can also be year round in some ways. So
You sort of contrasted hoppy and malty. Are those sort of two different flavor profiles that I'm not sure I understand what malty flavored beers are, or what the malt flavor would be in there? Mm-hmm. Could you describe either what the flavor is, or maybe like a beer that has a strong presence of that?
Yeah. So have you had Newcastle?
I think so.
Or a brown ale? Any brown ale?
Okay.
Brown ales are known for their maltiness. So it's that like toastiness, that breadiness, that doughiness. That's kind of the best, I think. So brown ales, again, are one of those like seasonal beers. Like a really good fall brown ale is amazing because it, like, there's really no bitterness from hops. It's all about the malt. It's all about the sort of, not sweetness, but perceived sweetness. Like you're taking a bite into like freshly baked bread, right?
Oh, okay.
So then hops have a little, I would say, a little more diversity in what they bring to the table. Mm-hmm. That's not the best way to put it, but only in the sense that they can bring bitterness, but they can also bring aroma and flavor. So like, again, hazy IPAs, not a lot of bitterness, but they have tons of hops in them. So it's all about the aroma and flavor. West Coast style IPAs have bitterness, but they also have aroma and flavor. So it's kind of a balance between those two things. So like if you think about, so Lagunitas IPA, classic West Coast style IPA, has that bitterness, that sort of backbone of bitterness, but then it has that citrusy sort of grapefruity aroma. I can think of some other examples, but really usually any like dark beer will have a lot of maltiness to it, whether it's like roasted malt, like an oatmeal stout, or if you've had like a dark lager, like even Northeast from Shells, it's a basic sort of dark lager, but it has that maltiness there, right? It's present. So.
Yeah, I think you painted the picture pretty well there with the whole spectrum of things that it was like. Because I really do I like the stout, oatmeal stout sort of thing as well. And there's a warmth there in those ones.
Yep.
And I think the sharpness that's kind of in the IPAs is much more backed off. So, do the malty beers have hops in them as well? They're just different.
Different quantity. So it's just generally it's like you just dial back on the amount, but also the variety that you use.
Interesting.
So yeah, it's all about like amount that you use, the time that it spends in the beer, like those types of variables. So,
any beers that you really like or are excited by and want to make, but like can't or don't know how? Are there any like frontiers in that regard?
There are. I'd have to think a little bit about it. I mean, there are always beers that I want to brew. Like there are always new beers that I want to experiment with or try. I mean, like our mixed culture sours, there are so many different things I can do with them. I actually have one I'll be brewing pretty soon. I just bought some spruce tips up from northern Minnesota. And I kind of want to play around with this idea of like spruce tips as adding like the same type of citrus notes that you get from hops because they have some of the same like chemicals in them. And so they were like hand-picked spruce tips. So it's kind of fun to not only like try it out, but also in mixed culture sours, you can have a lot of other things that come about that sort of boost those flavors. So that's always something that I'm playing around with. But yeah, I mean, I'm always like looking around at the next thing that's coming up in what people are interested in. Some of them I'm like, I don't know if you heard of like smoothie style sours, which are like super fruited sour beers. The issues with those is like packaging them without them like re-fermenting in the can and it's like exploding.
I've heard of that. I've heard of like really exclusive beers getting made and then inadvertently like sitting on a shelf and just exploding there. How much fruit is going into these things? Is this like an enormous amount?
Yeah. It's like you can't even imagine. I've read breweries that do those. They buy the fruit by like the ton because it's fruit puree. It's just basically liquid fruit that you can dump into the tank. But yeah, it's just an insane amount, and it's hard to control. Once you add that fruit, it's hard to control it from going about fermentation a second time.
That's what a lot of times I'll get a hazy on tap and I'll try it and I can feel it go over my teeth and I'm like, this has to be like Mountain Dew levels of sugar in this beer, and like it
can be,
I'm like, I don't know, this gave me a tummy ache.
Yeah.
But I really kind of appreciate this white wine feeling here.
Yeah.
I mean, it might be because I had like 3 beers before that, but we only have one. We should crack the last one just so we get to taste it before we wrap up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you pass that bottle over? Or I'll trade you.
Kind of the fun thing about these 2 beers is that they both won awards at a sort of Minnesota-wide competition.
Oh, cool.
So it was kind of a fun way, the first one. That one probably isn't going to explode like the other one, so hopefully.
Well, at least do it in front of mine. Keep going.
Aromatic.
Oh.
It worked. It went launching up into the corner.
Probably just because they warmed up, but They have a mind of their own sometimes.
Yeah, sour. So multiculture sours. Did I say that right?
Mixed culture, but
Mixed
same
culture?
idea. Yep. So
how's that different from a different beer? Is that referring to the fruit that gets added and stuff?
nope. So the idea is that this is a little microbiology lesson for you here.
Good, needed it.
Yeah. So mixed culture basically means you've got yeast, but you've also got bacteria. So in a standard beer like a Pilsner, we just use yeast. Like it's a monoculture is what you'd call it. And that's why it's like really clean, really crisp. These beers as mixed culture beers, the bacteria think about yogurt, the same type of bacteria as in yogurt as in these beers. So it's bringing that acidity, that like tartness. And then the yeast that we use is a wild yeast called Brettanomyces that brings a lot of that funkiness. Like some people describe it as like a horse blanket or a farmyard. These are actually...
This is in Sibling.
Both of them actually. Yep.
Okay. I didn't taste any horse blanket in there.
So they also bring a lot of like fruity notes too. So like it's just what they produce as yeast. It's kind of the compounds they produce.
I think that last one is my favorite. I like that one a lot.
This one, I could get a little farmyard in there.
Yeah.
I could see that.
And
I've heard people endearingly describe scotch with dirty socks and road tar.
Yep.
And I've been like, yeah, I taste that, and I don't know why I like it.
Yeah. So in the wine industry, actually, Brettanomyces is, also in the beer industry, it's a contaminant. Like generally you don't want it in your beers. There are actually wineries that produce natural wines that have only Brettanomyces. And so it brings a lot of like complexity to the wine, similar to what you'd taste in a mixed culture sour. So it's like, it's a different type of yeast and it does different things and you have to like respect it for what it does and you can't use it all the time. But it's fun to play around with. So
is it at all similar to what's done for kombucha? And do you know? Because kombucha has a sort of similar like sharpness or acidity to it.
Yeah. So kombucha is a really fun sort of like ecosystem for these bugs. So like you've got acetic acid bacteria, which produce vinegar, acetic acid. You've got lactic acid bacteria, which produce that sort of yogurt tartness. And then you've got some wild yeast. So there are actually Brettanomyces in certain types of kombucha. So like that slimy thing that you find if you've made kombucha before. I don't know if you if you've dabbled in that.
The SCOBY.
Yeah. So that's a really interesting like relationship that those bugs have in that SCOBY. And they go through like this really, I could go on forever about this, but they go through like a progression of fermentation to produce the final product of kombucha, which can be, depending upon the SCOBY, it could be really like abrasively tart, or it can be, a little more, I would say elegant, I guess you could say. And it all depends upon the conditions, but also the SCOBY that you use. So, but yeah, a lot of similarities between them.
Okay. And would that be mixed culture, or is that a monoculture but in a different form?
Yep, that'd be mixed culture.
Mixed.
Yep,
Okay.
same idea.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. We're learning.
This beer is named Sibling. Is it after a sibling?
Yeah, so I brewed this last year. So we have a beer called Firstborn, which was named for our first daughter, Isla. And she was born coming up on 4 years ago. And then Sibling is named after her sister, who was born last summer.
Oh,
who I brewed this beer for.
congratulations.
So thanks. Yeah, it was. It's just we felt like we had to brew a beer for her too. So, but yeah, it's been fun. So, yeah.
You just gotta. That's gotta be kind of weird to be like, you're a child. Just wait 21 years, or whenever you feel that's appropriate as a parent.
Yeah, in Wisconsin, it's like 16 or something. But yeah, I mean, it's it's kind of fun they come down to the tap room too every so often and just kind of have them socialize with people. I'm really used to it. Again, like I'm from Wisconsin, so going down to the bar like with your family is just kind of a normal thing, not necessarily drinking, but just to socialize, right? So
Certainly. I mean, it is normal. Like alcohol is part of our culture, and I think having like a big 21-year-old threshold to cross, the way people act when they haven't interacted with alcohol before that or seen healthy examples of alcohol consumption is like kind of scary. I mean, I worked downtown at Red Rocks, and you'd see the way like fresh college students behaved, and you're like, well, I mean, this might not be a recipe for success this evening.
yeah.
And I feel like if there was more of that, like, you know, someone teaching you how to drink responsibly and be like, hey, you're gonna feel better tomorrow if you don't have a bad time tonight, it would be good.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, I think as much as you know, we try to keep kids away from like ever approaching alcohol until they're 21. It's definitely an important thing to like consider talking about, or like just making it so that it's not such a what's the word I'm trying to think of here, but
It's like a coming of age thing almost.
Yeah.
You know, they feel like there's this pressure from the industry to behave that way. Like, oh, you're 21, you need to be wild now and do this thing. Like, I mean, I've lived in that, so it's a real thing, and I don't necessarily think it's helpful for those people who are going through it and don't see that as not normal.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I agree. I mean, like, once you experience it, in undergrad, when I was at La Crosse, like it's a college drinking town. It's just one of those things, people go all out, and then eventually they learn, but it's that experience that maybe you don't want other people to go through, you know? Like, we want to maybe tell them that you probably can avoid like binge drinking, or
You could iron out a couple of those kinks in the road.
yeah. And you'd still have a great time.
Yeah.
You can, in moderation, you know,
Certainly.
it's what it's all about. So.
I've only blacked out one time, and I got kicked out because I tried to rap battle everyone there. So
Oh yeah.
I haven't blacked out since.
You learn your lesson. That's the thing.
Did you have any shout outs, call outs, or promos you wanted to get in before we wrap up here?
Yeah. Over the next 2 months or so, we'll have a couple different events at the tap room, or we're going to be serving at the Mankato. It's called the Bluff Riders Charge mountain bike race. That's on the 24th of July. We've got a food truck on the 16th of July. We've got some music coming up actually in August, and we're at the start of the River Valley 100. If you haven't done that, it's a bike ride / race through the River Valley, set up by the bike shop, but we're the start and the end of it, and we'll have a food truck there for that as well. So just a spattering of different things. So
That's awesome. And if someone wanted to check you out online, you got a best spot for that?
So we're redesigning our website right now. So like things are going through the pipeline, but localebrew.com is kind of our website. Social media, Instagram and Facebook is kind of the best spot right now to keep an eye on things.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the beers and for the hangs, and I learned a ton today, so that was really awesome.
Yeah.
Appreciate you
good to
coming
hear.
on.
Well, thanks for
for
inviting
bringing the
me.
beers.
Thanks. Delightful and delicious.
Good.
This last one is tasty.